Okay, welcome everyone to today's webinar. I'm Romy from Scrum Training Institute. I will be your host. Today's topic is Scrum in Challenging Times, presented by Fabian Schwartz. Thank you everyone for being here today and for your time. Before we start, let's go over some housekeeping items. Please make sure that you stay on mute for the entire meeting. We will have time for questions and discussions at the end. You can use the chat feature on the bottom if you have a question while he's going over any topic. And just so everybody knows, this is being recorded and we will be sending out a copy of the video to everyone via email in the next few days. And that is all that I have. I'm going to hand it over to Fabian Schwartz, our presenter today. So thank you, everyone.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Romy. Thank you very much. And yeah, welcome to this webinar. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna share my screen really quick. Okay, here we go. I see still people connecting, but let's start to honor your time. So the topic today is Scrum in Challenging Times. And what I mean with challenging times is, I think nothing new everybody knows and can imagine. It's the COVID crisis. I found this cartoon to express pretty much the problem we see in almost every country in the world right now. And the real problem, I believe, is that nobody knows the true impact of that until now. And actually, I also believe we haven't even reached the real problem yet. But what I want to do during this webinar is not talking only about the COVID crisis, but it's talking about the uncertainty that generates and how we can use Scrum to handle this uncertainty. So how Scrum can help us through this crisis. Okay. So who am I? My name is Fabian Schwartz. I'm a native German, but I'm right now located in Bogota, Colombia, South America. I've worked for over 20 years in projects, mainly in technology initially, but right now also oil and gas, retail, marketing, lots of financial services, telecommunications, lots of different areas. I initially started working in Germany and Europe, and from there I moved to Australia, and from there then to Colombia, and from here we work basically the Americas from Canada to Argentina, with our main base being Colombia and Mexico, Ecuador, Peru, the countries around. So I've taught over 30,000 people online. In face-to-face, I do not know, but have also been a couple of thousands. So this is me. I don't want to waste your time with a long introduction of me. If you want to know more, then we can connect on LinkedIn. They have all my details. So let's get straight to the topic. So obviously this crisis is generating uncertainty. But before we talk about this uncertainty, I would like to talk a little bit about the environment before the crisis, because it was already an uncertain environment. Just now it's way more uncertain than it was before. Okay. So let's talk about the environment, the business environment before the crisis. Let's talk about a little bit uncertainty during the crisis. And let's talk about a potential solution, which I think could be Scrum. Okay. So let's talk about what happened before the crisis. So in the last years emerged what we call Industry 4.0. Okay. This Industry 4.0 has accelerated the change in the environment, and with that obviously has increased very strong the uncertainty. So Industry 4.0 combines lots of things like Internet of Things, big data, digitalization, etc. But I don't want to talk about what is the reason, or what is Industry 4.0 in detail. I would like to talk about a little bit more about what's the result of that, and what's the impact and result of that on our business plans, on our strategies, on our companies. So if you see here a little bit this slide, you can see that many companies or many technologies, many products, many strategies have been replaced by something completely new. Okay, so if you see, like, you have DVDs, they were replaced by streaming. Television is right now replaced by streaming. Okay, taxis are replaced by things like Uber or other car sharing companies. Newspapers are replaced by the internet. Banks are replaced by fintechs. And you can continue this list on and on and on. And some or several of these strategies or products have actually been replaced several times in a row. If you see Nokia replaced by BlackBerry and BlackBerry replaced by iOS and Android, for example. So this has created a very high uncertainty in my business, okay, which means I have lots of change in my business environment, which means for me, I have to be able to respond very fast to this change. To give you an example, this here is the former CEO of Fuji, and he said, imagine Toyota would have to survive in a world where nobody buys cars. And that's basically what we're in right now, correct? So there are companies that have to turn their business model around 180 degrees. To give an example of that, let's take Fujifilm. Okay, so Fujifilm obviously produced film for cameras, but those films or those cameras basically were then later replaced by digital cameras. So less and less people would buy films. So Fuji changed their business model from producing film to producing digital cameras. Well, then the problem was digital cameras were replaced by cell phone cameras. So everybody is carrying a cell phone around, so automatically they would carry a camera around. And those cameras by now are so good that you can use them for almost everything for like amateur pictures. And even some people use them for professional pictures. So the second time they were disrupted in a way that they had to change completely their business model. So what they were doing then, they used lots of their patents and started to produce materials for LCD screens, medical technology, cinema technology, etc., and also anti-aging creams, for example. But imagine you're in a business and you have such an uncertainty, such fast pacing environment that changes so fast that you have to change several times your business model. And that's actually something that happened long before the current crisis. There's a statistic out there that says, I'm not sure if it's about the S&P index or the Dow Jones index, but it says more than 90% of the companies in this index has changed their strategy completely at least once. So that means more than 90% of the companies listed in the index are not operating on their initial strategy. Sorry. Okay. So this just to give an idea, it's not just, oh, we have COVID and we have a crisis and now we have high uncertainty. We already had an environment of high uncertainty. The problem is, just get a little worse in terms of uncertainty. Okay. So we obviously have COVID, so which has caused things like lockdowns, but that's not the only thing. So, for example, we have one of the lowest oil prices in decades. So that affects economies. Okay, and I used lots of data from the US here, but that's to give you an example for outside the US. Also, it affected, for example, exchange rates. I'm in Colombia right now. So the exchange rate, the Colombian pesos versus the US dollar is the worst in history right now. Okay, so this affects the country, and there are more countries out there like this. So all these things create an even higher uncertainty and create all problems on their own. So let's go through each one of them real quick. So, well, I think by now people are probably tired of hearing about COVID because it's everywhere in the news and everywhere. But what's the result of that is that many regions are in a mandatory lockdown. Okay, so for example, like I'm right now in the lockdown here. Yesterday it was extended to 1st of July. There are countries in Europe that are already open again. Some states in the US, I understand, are already open or are opening up again. But they're still in partial lockdown, and there are few places in the world that actually allow or that went back to the same behavior that they had before the virus. So what's the result of that? Remote work. Okay, so the first thing that happened when we went to lockdown was, okay, everybody that could work remote did work remote. The problem is not every business is suitable for remote work. Okay, so if you are not able to adapt and change here, what is happening is like you're probably out of business very soon, or you're already out of business. So what happened then? Well, unemployment increases, right? People lose their jobs. If you see some US data, I'm pretty sure you're aware of that, but this is probably the highest unemployment claims in decades, if not in history. And similar things are happening in other countries. For example, today, Colombia published the unemployment rate for April. It's 19 point something %. It has doubled since last year, April. And it's only April. Now let's wait what happened in May. So this obviously affects us. Okay. What happened with the oil price? Lowest oil price in decades. Well, if you look at the US, there are probably 1.5 million jobs in the oil industry, or at least that was the number of jobs that were in the oil industry in 2019. Well, low oil prices obviously mean that people will be losing their jobs here. In Colombia, and many countries in South America, actually, the country depends on selling oil, on oil export. So if the oil price plummets, well, they have less money to help the economy, right? Oil stocks in general are plummeting, so companies that produce oil have obviously problems. And we are also pretty close to storage capacity. I don't know if you have seen a couple of weeks ago, we had negative oil prices. So you basically had to pay somebody to take your oil. And that happens because there's no more storage capacity. So we are pretty close to limit. So once we reach the limit, we will see again negative oil prices, which is worse, obviously. So you have to pay somebody to take your product. What happens? Businesses will close, unemployment will increase. Now, let's talk a little bit about some countries outside the US. So the US and the Eurozone, they have pretty stable currencies. And usually what tends to happen in a crisis is people or countries move into secure currencies like the US dollar. But all the other countries that don't have these currencies, they have problems because people get out of their currencies, which devaluates the currencies. For example, in Colombia, we had a 25% devaluation of the currency, which means we lost 25% of buying power. And that means businesses that are importing and therefore paying in dollar or in euros will suffer. So that means then prices go up. That means people buy less. That means, again, businesses close. And again, unemployment increase. Okay. So just to give you an idea, this is not just COVID. This is like a whole system of complex situations together that create a very high uncertainty. So what's going to happen? Well, which is pretty sure is that we will have a reduction of capital flow. So this is like very normal in a crisis, any kind of crisis. And we'll have an exponential increase in uncertainty, which we already have, and it's probably going to increase. So where will that lead us? I don't think that anybody knows. But for sure, we have to be able to change and change and change and change again. So that means for businesses, many businesses have to change their business model. For example, restaurants here, they can't open. So, but they have to pay their rent, for example. So if they can't open, well, what can they do? Well, maybe they can change to delivery, like selling online and then switch to delivery. But they have to do something to don't go bankrupt. Okay. Another thing that's pretty likely to happen is that companies are looking to automate more and more processes to lower their cost. And one thing that's also sure to happen is that more and more businesses are going to digitalize their appearance, their business, their whole business model. And if you're still in lockdown, then it's very likely that you might disappear if you're not able to digitalize. In that sense, I believe that COVID is actually one of the strongest drivers for digital transformation, probably stronger than any CEO before. And also we will obviously have teams work remotely. We also have teams working remotely, and we have companies that announce that even after the lockdown, they will permit their team members to work remotely. Twitter, for example, announced that until the end of the year, people can work remotely. So let's see what Scrum can do for us in this environment of uncertainty. So Scrum, if we apply correctly, can help us reduce this uncertainty, or mainly react faster to this uncertainty. Let's say it like this. Scrum is also an essential part for digital transformation, and Scrum can help you to create high-performance remote teams. So let's see how that works. And first of all, the basis of Scrum, or the fundamentals in Scrum, you can download in the Scrum Guide. This is for free, scrumguides.org, by Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland. This is a free guide, and it says the rules of the game. So this is the, let's compare it with chess, for example. So if you want to play chess, the first thing you have to do is you have to learn the rules of the game. So the Scrum Guide is probably a pretty good point to start. But also, if you play chess and the only thing you know are the rules of the game, well, you won't get very far, right? So you probably learn that you can't just pull out a dragon and put that dragon on the chessboard. But also you will probably lose against everybody that plays at least a little bit of chess. So what you need are the strategies for that game. So what I would like to do in this webinar is give you some ideas how Scrum can help you. If you want more detail, Scrum Training Institute can help you, for example, with trainings, or you can also buy my new book here on Amazon, that your Scrum Playbook. It's Poker on a Chess, that also gives you some strategies. But let's see how that works. So how does Scrum handles uncertainty? So what usually happens if you work in a traditional way, or if you develop projects in a traditional ways, you start at the beginning and you plan out the project to reach a third goal, which is this year. Okay. Now then you would work on that, and when you finish, you hand over this result to your client, and your client then will give you some feedback on that. If you're lucky, he will say, okay, everything is good. But if you're unlucky, which happens statistically in more than 70% of the cases, they won't be very happy. Okay, why? Because they haven't seen for a long time what you were doing, and maybe their environment has changed in that time. We have statistics that tell us that 36% of the scope on a project of a year usually changes. So, and how does Scrum handles that? Well, when you start planning, you still look for a certain goal, but you have to acknowledge that there's lots of uncertainty about how that can turn out at the end. Okay. So what you do is, instead of trying to develop at once the whole thing, you just pick one part, and you develop one small part and one small iteration, and you deliver the part to the client. Now the client still can tell you he doesn't like it, but since you're still in the beginning of the project, you can ask him, well, why? What's wrong with it? What would you need us to improve here? And the client then will give you feedback. What that feedback does is that feedback helps you to lower the uncertainty. Okay, so uncertainty becomes smaller. And you might change the final objective a little bit. You adjust it a little bit. And then you deliver another small part, and you get feedback, and you close down uncertainty, and you have maybe changed a little bit the final result. But what happens is, because you get fast feedback and you learn very fast, you can handle uncertainty way better. And if you have an environment with such a fast-pacing change as it is now, well, you certainly don't want to develop something for a year and then hand it over in a year. Because in a year, so much has changed that it might be completely useless once you hand it over. What can Scrum do in digital transformation? So here's a measure from Riverflex from digital transformation. So according to them, there are 5 pillars for 5 columns for digital transformation. We usually need a new business model, a business or a digital business model, let's say. You need to have customers and sales channels. You need operations, and the two basements or fundamentals for that is obviously your technology transformation and an agile transformation. Okay. So Scrum is one of the most used agile frameworks. Depending on the statistics you look at, agile teams use between 50 and 90% Scrum. So it's the most used agile framework. And inside a digital transformation, what can Scrum do for you? So the first thing is, Scrum focuses on generating customer value. So in digital transformation, what you want to have is, you want to have the customer as a centerpiece, and you want to create your digital business model around value for the customer. And Scrum helps you doing exactly that. Now, Scrum also ensures frequent feedback, which when you do a change is very important to learn. Scrum adapts quickly to business changes. Again, like right now, that's probably one of the most important things you can have. And since this will be a cultural change, so if you move from a traditional business model to a digital business model, you will have kind of a cultural change, and Scrum can help you with that. So obviously only doing Scrum will not change your culture, but it can be a good first step to do so, and it for sure will help. Now let's talk about one of the questions that we, in the last 3 months, is probably the #1 question we get. Okay, how can we create high performance teams when they have to work remotely? So this is interesting because for years we have told our clients that one of the things you should do is having co-located teams. But when you work remotely, well, it's kind of difficult, right? So we have developed a model we call a high performance engagement model, or high performance commitment model, actually. And that has 6 pillars or 6 columns, and Scrum helps us with all of them. So let me go through it a little quick, and then let's go through each one in detail on what can Scrum do for us. So #1, we need a purpose that will guide us remotely. Because when you work remotely, you can have a strong control and a monitoring and control style of work that will kill your team. Okay, so we need a purpose to guide us. We need a trusting environment. We need cross-functional or multifunctional teams. We need shared consciousness, psychological safety, and focus. So let's see what Scrum can do for us. So in Scrum, we have a role which is called the product owner. Okay. And the product owner, in a certain sense, is a visionary, and is the visionary who gives the team a purpose. And again, so in the last 3 months, we have talked with over 100 people. And initially, we were thinking, well, when they start working remotely, they should have more time now. Because, for example, they have no commute. They stay at home, they get up and can do what they want, right? But what they told us, almost all of them, is that it feels now that they have more work than before, but get less done than before. And the reason for that being is that they are in more and more meetings that the middle management usually set up to control them, because they feel that they lost control when people are at home. So this won't work very well if you want to have a high performance team. So the idea is that you can give the team a purpose. The product owner is the person in charge of that, and he's the person to create the vision for the team or for the product you are developing. And then the idea is that the team self-organizes around the purpose, and Scrum certainly come in as well around the sprint goals, to achieve that. And what you do is you manage them basically by objectives, if you want to call it like that. Okay. Now, trust. Why is trust important? So recently we analyzed some studies, psychological studies, psychological effects of remote work on people, and they're not very good. Okay, so there are lots of negative psychological effects of remote work, and some of them are, for example, I feel that my peers don't help me. I feel that they don't trust me. I feel that my goals are not important to them. So there are lots of negative effects, and the number one countermeasure is creating trust. Now, there are several elite teams that know how to create trust. For example, here we have the Navy SEALs. What they do, for example, is they have what's their boot camp, I would call it like that. So the phase one is a physical conditioning training, and during this phase they have something which is called Hell Week. Okay, and Hell Week is basically 5.5 days continuous training, and in those 5.5 days you have in total 4 hours of sleep. I'm not talking about 4 hours each night, in total 4 hours of sleep. And you have to withstand like very, very tough situations, like the cold, like the rain, like exhaustion, like laying there in the cold ocean for hours. And the only way, like, actually there's an interesting question I sometimes ask is, who do you think are the people that don't make it? And it's not the weak, it's not the physically weak, let's say. Or if you turn the question around, who are the people that make it? That's not the physical strong or the strongest physically, but it's the people that work in a team. And if you see here this human chain, like you can imagine, like if you're on a chain like that, well, you can stand the cold of the ocean longer than if you would do that alone. Doesn't matter how physically strong you are. So what you want from them is you want the team to solve problems together. Okay. So again, Scrum has self-organized teams. The product owner gives them a vision. The product owner helps them creating a sprint goal, and the idea is that the team self-organizes around those goals and resolve that together. So how does that physically look like? The idea is not that you talk in a daily Scrum and then everybody goes off and does his own thing. The idea is that you stay connected during the day and try to solve together a problem. To give you an example. Next point was Scrum teams are cross-functional. That's another thing we took from Special Forces. So Special Forces also are cross-functional. So what does it mean? You have several roles in the team. You have the sniper, you have the radio guy, you have the medic. But what happens if, let's say, I don't know, the medic is busy attending a team member, or maybe you get even shot. Okay, so what happened then? Well, then there would be nobody who could do his job, right? So what they do is they create something they call T-shaped people. The T-shaped people refers to, I do have my specialty, so I'm a sniper, for example, okay, but I'm cross-trained in the horizontal part of the team in the other people's work. For example, I'm trained in the medic stuff. Now, does it make me an expert medic? No, it doesn't. But can I help doing some basic medic stuff? Yes, it does. And that's the same we want to do in a team. And if you do that right, the result of that will be that we don't have bottlenecks, because if my specialty becomes the bottleneck, whereas other people can actually help me. And I also don't have idle time, because when my specialty is not needed anymore, because I can help others. And that actually creates flow. Another thing that I actually found very interesting. We call it here collective consciousness, collective awareness. And that came from the idea when I observed ants, I was thinking, well, for some reason they all know what they have to do, right? Everybody knows its role, and there's no project manager ant, and there's no department manager ant, and there's no CEO ant, but still they know what they have to do. So the idea is that somehow people believe they have a collective consciousness. And a story I like to tell is about a friend that has worked, I think it was in Mercedes-Benz in Germany, and they would produce the brakes for Mercedes-Benz. And they had performance problems in their fabric, in their plant. So they would hire consultants to analyze the situation and help them. And one of the things the consultants would do was asking them, well, what are you doing here? I would say, what a dumb question, huh? We're producing brakes. Can't you see that? So they analyzed the situation. They did some countermeasures. One of those was to bring them to Stuttgart and showing them the Mercedes-Benz headquarters. And I don't remember the brakes for which car it was. Let's invent that. So let's say it's for the Mercedes-Benz 500 SL. So I would show them the car, and I would say, okay, this is the Mercedes-Benz 500 SL. The brakes that you produce are an essential part of this car. Okay. Without your brakes, this car is absolutely useless. So obviously they would do some more countermeasures, and a couple of months later, the consultants would come back, performance had improved, and they would again start to ask, well, what are you doing here? And I would say, we are producing the Mercedes-Benz 500 SL. So now they had collective consciousness. What is their overall shared goal? It's to get this car on the street secure. And they understand how their small part fit into the big picture. So in order to be able to do that, we need transparency. And Scrum obviously promotes transparency, which is one of the basic of the 3 pillars of Scrum. Now, also, beside of trust, we need psychological safety. So just to define that a little bit, I think recently that has been in the press a lot in the last 2-3 years, but let me still define it. So psychological safety refers to, do I feel secure in this environment, on this team, to take a risk? Okay. So, for example, what's the opposite of psychological safety? So you commit a mistake, or you make a mistake, and you get immediately punished. Okay. So that's the opposite, because then that would mean, okay, if I take a risk and that turns out to be a mistake, well, they will punish me, so I won't do that. So how can Scrum help us to create that? Well, the Scrum values are actually designed to create that environment. So Scrum values are things like commitment, respect, openness, I forget one, focus. I mentioned before, one is missing. Okay, but so Scrum values, if I manage to create an environment with Scrum values, I almost automatically create an environment of psychological safety, which is one of the main ingredients for high performance teams. I'm not sure if you have heard about the Google Aristotle project, where Google analyzed lots of its teams to find out which is the #1 factor that creates a high performance team. And their initial hypothesis was star players. So if I have high performance members on the team, I will have a high performance team. So when they get their first data set back, they would see, okay, well, we have teams that have superstars, a lot of superstars, and they have bad performance. And we have some teams that have no superstars at all on the team, and have really good performance. So they went back and forth and kept collecting data. And after a while, they found several factors. And the number one factor that indicated in Google that the team would be a high performance team was psychological safety. So obviously that's something you want. And the last point on this high performance commitment model is focus. Okay. So now that the Last Dance series out here in Netflix, I thought I put Michael Jordan on here, a guy with tremendous focus. But Scrum also helps us to create focus. So how does Scrum does it? So first of all, we have sprints. So sprints are short iterations. And it turns out when we work in short iterations, our focus is way better than if we have year-long projects. So if you do that in your day-to-day, I don't know if you heard about the Pomodoro technique, where you basically try to focus for 25 minutes or a couple of short amount of time on something. So this is based on that idea that short amounts of time, it's easier to focus. So Scrum gives us a sprint goal. So this short iteration also has a goal. So I work towards this goal. For now, I don't have to care what happened in 2 years. I try to reach this goal. And obviously there's also a product backlog, which gives us a little bit longer term view, but also longer term focus. And it gives us the priorities to also tell us what to focus on. Okay. So to sum that up, if you want to have a high performance team, and that has to work remote, we can't control or work by monitoring and control. We have to give the team a purpose, a vision. We have to let them self-organize with a multifunctional, cross-functional team around that purpose. We have to create an environment where they can focus on this vision and on that purpose. So we have to protect them from interruptions, right? So we have to create an environment where they can trust each other, where we can develop trust, but not only trust, we have to bring it to a level of psychological safety. And in a situation where the Scrum team is not doing the whole product itself, but is part of a bigger entity, we have to create shared consciousness so they know what part of the product they're working on and what's that important for, so they can guide themselves towards the correct decision. Now, there's one more thing to remote teams, and it sounds like a last note, but it's probably the most important thing for remote teams. It is communication. Okay. Remote teams need more communication than co-located teams. Why? Naturally, we're pretty bad in communication, but co-location, actually Reinhardsen said once, co-location is the closest thing to fairy dust. So why? Because co-location covers up or compensates for bad communication, because I have the person on my side, and if the communication didn't work, I can just ask them, hey man, sorry, I need some input here from you. So co-location compensates for a lot of bad communication. Now the thing is, once you are remote, it's not that easy. Well, you still can call them, but it's not, the access is not the same kind of access. Okay. So when people signed the Agile Manifesto, there was this study around, I don't know who brought that up, where they said that the most effective way of communication is 2 people at the whiteboard. Okay, 2 people at the whiteboard, remote obviously doesn't work. So we can't do that. Well, what can we do? Well, let's see what's the second most effective way of communicating. It's 2 people at a video conference. I'm saying video conference. Okay. So if you can have 2 people at the whiteboard, well, then you should at least have video conference. Why is the video so important? More than 60% of the communication is non-verbal communication. So it's not the words you say, it's how you say it, and what tone you say it, how your face looks when you say it. So there's a very big part of communication that is lost when you can't see the other person. So we use in every our meetings video conference, and if we solve a problem together, we have video conference open. We have videos open. We don't have the daily Scrum in the morning and then each one goes off. So that would be my recommendation. Now there will be people that will say, okay, well, the Agile Manifesto says individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Well, yeah, that's absolutely right. I totally agree. So individuals and interactions are way more important than processes and tools. But if you work on remote teams, you need tools to facilitate those interactions. If you don't have tools, you can't have a video conference. If you don't have tools, you can't even have a call. So you have two choices: where you stop communicating, or you stop interacting, or you use tools to interact. Okay. So let's bring that all together. Let's sum that up, and then let's open up for questions. So first of all, Scrum can help you to change your business model fast if it is necessary. Okay. So how Scrum does it? Well, Scrum can push digital transformation, or can at least help with digital transformation. Scrum can help manage an uncertain environment, and Scrum adapts quickly to change. So Scrum also can help us with remote working teams, and Scrum can do this by, with all its elements, creating a high performance team, even though that they're actually remote. Okay. So with this, I would like to thank all of you first for participating here in that webinar. And now let's open up for questions. Let's see what we have in the chat so far. Okay, I can hear Jens is saying Alistair Coburn communicated this study that I just mentioned. Wait, so if you have questions, go ahead. Romy.
I was going to say, while we wait for any comments or questions in the chat, I'm going to quickly start a poll so that we can get some feedback from the attendees. Can you see it on your screen?
Sorry, what is it?
Can you see the poll?
Yes.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Guys, there should be a pop-up on your screen, just a retrospective poll we're doing after the webinar. If you guys could just answer the 2 questions and send it in so we can get your feedback. Okay, we haven't gotten any questions or comments to the chat section, but is there anything else that you wanted to discuss, Fabian?
Well, like here's, for example, a comment I see. So are there any tips how you can increase social talks that build trust in a remote environment? So what we try to do is we basically try to emulate what some call the water cooler effect. So what you have in a physical environment, you have spaces in your company where people met or meet informally. For example, a water cooler. And in the company I worked in Germany, we had a huge company and they only had 2 photocopy machines. So people would usually line up in front of those photocopy machines. And what would they do? Well, they would talk, right? Informal. But this is very important to create trust, for example. So what we do is we have every second week, we have an event in the company where one person can present whatever topic he likes, very short. The event total is at least an hour. The presentation is 10 minutes. We will send our team members by way of Uber Eats food to her home. And after that short presentation, we will just informally talk about his presentation or her presentation, also about all the other stuff that's going on in our mind, or worries, etc. So that we found, for example, that helps us. Now here's Jorge is asking, can you elaborate more about the Agile Manifesto remotely, about the tools interacting? Well, yeah, so it's not exactly an Agile Manifesto remotely. So the Agile Manifesto is the Agile Manifesto. And the value I pulled out there was the one that said individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Okay. So at the beginning of this year, when everybody went remote, we get lots of critical voices about now what why Zoom, why Trello, why Planner, why Teams, why, like, they complain about all these tools and we don't want these tools, we don't need tools. But there's something important to understand. When you are remote and you don't have any tool, you very likely don't have any business or any way of interacting with other team members. So don't get me wrong, like don't make the tool the most important thing. That's not what I want to say. Still, individuals interactions over processes and tools, but you will need tools. That's what I want to say with this point. Dominica is asking how to encourage the team to use cameras during a video meeting. Some team members don't want to turn them on. Well, there are several ways. It depends a little bit. For example, if you see communication problems, you can bring them up in the retrospective and then try to get to the solution that maybe you need better communication, which then usually leads you to video communication. Something that doesn't sound very nice, probably is not very nice, but you can also do it by brute force if you have the power to do that. No? So when a crisis hits us here, I basically said to the team, well, we have to use video conference for that and that reason. That's root of the game. That's not discussable. But that's not very nice. But I felt we needed that. Otherwise, we will lose. Like usually, when you go from co-located to remote, first what happens is you lose performance. I was fearing we will lose even more performance. So that's not a very nice way to do that, but it's a very fast way to do that. Jorge, for imparting training besides the tools for webinars, do you suggest any tools to make the online trainings more dynamic and keep people's attention? Some session lasts 3 to 4 hours or more. Well, yeah, for sure. So this morning we had a 4-hour CSPO session. And first thing I would like to recommend, if you do that online, is not think all the time about tools. Like first think about how you structure your training, how you create interactivity in the training. Okay. So then you have to take into account people probably need more breaks than before. And then you can look at tools. For example, right now we are using Zoom here. Zoom can use breakout rooms that helps us to create smaller groups and work in smaller groups. You can also use collaborative tools like Muru, Mural. Sometimes we even use Trello to do some stuff with Trello in the training. So there's lots of things you can do. I would still say a little bit careful with tools. Okay, so you have to understand the tool is a tool. So if you buy a Ferrari, which is a pretty good tool, but you don't know how to drive, the Ferrari is useless. And the same happens with every other tool. So if you buy a very complex, powerful tool, but you or your team members or your training participants do not know how to use that, then you have a problem. So like, stick to easy tools. That's what I would like to say. I don't see any more questions. I don't know if anyone has more questions. Okay, what are your questions are coming in? Okay. how to measure happiness in the team and how to identify if it's true. Okay, so here's my take on that. So I think what people actually want is engagement. But engagement is pretty difficult to measure. Now, in several studies, it was found that happiness is a good proxy for engagement. It's not perfect, but it's a good proxy, and that it's easier to measure. You can just ask people how happy they are. Now, how true is that? Well, we don't know. Okay. So you probably want to try that anonymous, so you get, let's say, honester answers, more honest answers. But still, like, I remember a study here in a very big, very well-known international company, like one of the biggest in the world, where they tried to measure their I wouldn't call it happiness, but team satisfaction, or worker satisfaction, let's call it like that. And it turned out to be great. What happened, so I know several people from that company and nobody was happy. And I asked them, well, what happened? How can that be? So they said, well, yeah, we would get these questionnaire, and then each team manager would evaluate the result of the questionnaire with their team. So we were scared we get problems and we would vote bad. So, but that doesn't make any sense. So if you do that, then you won't get very far. Okay. Oscar's asking, have you worked with a company that wants to partially implement Scrum? For example, no retrospective, no video conferencing, no remote teams. What negative outcomes can be made visible to management to trigger change? It's something we have seen, but it did not work very, very well. Okay, so well, remember that the Scrum Guide has the rules of the game. Okay, so if you start playing chess and you just take a queen off the board because you don't like to play with a queen, but you have a major disadvantage versus against the other player. Okay, and the same happens with Scrum. So many people call it Scrum bot. So we are doing Scrum, but we have a project manager. We are doing Scrum, but we don't do retrospective. We are doing Scrum, but we do one daily Scrum per week. We are doing Scrum, but we have sprints that are 3 months long. So if people do that, or if teams do that, what they're actually doing is they don't do Scrum. What they do is they use elements of Scrum. Like sometimes these elements help them, sometimes they don't, but what they certainly can't expect is that you get a major performance improvement. So sometimes it's difficult to convince management. In several occasions, we had conversations that looked like this. They would say to us, okay, well, you can't be such a purist. You have to adjust Scrum to our environment. And then we would talk and say, I would say, okay, well, so what do you want? Like you want still a project manager? Okay, you want to have and you call him a Scrum Master. You want a weekly status meeting and you want to call it the daily Scrum. You want to have a work breakdown structure and you call it the product backlog. So what you're doing is you're doing the same that you did before, just with Scrum vocabulary. Well, that won't help you. There's not any change. And some people would understand, some wouldn't. But there's one thing that's way more powerful in this discussion. If you can get at least one team in the company to do real Scrum, true Scrum, and they usually will be successful, and then you show others their success. And success is contagious. So if you have a team in a company that has 400% performance improvement, believe me, all the other teams will look at this team and will ask them, how did you do it? Is more comments here? So there's a webinar on the 11th of June. They're telling me about agile team health check. So that might be something interesting for the happiness issue, for example. Okay. Well, I don't see any more questions. If on, then let's say thanks a lot for all of you for your time. Thanks to be here with us, and I hope that was somehow helpful. Okay, yes, one more thing. David says if the company started working with Scrumban and they have increased the results, do you think that if they change to Scrum, will get better? Well, I don't know the context, so it's difficult to answer that with a yes or no. Well, let's say Taiichi Ono, the creator of Kanban, said the objective of Kanban is to remove all Kanban from the system. Okay, so usually what you do is you apply Kanban in a team that can't apply Scrum yet. Because at the end, Scrum is in a certain sense Kanban with a WIP limit of 1 and an obligation to do continuous feedback and retrospective. Okay, then thanks again. Thank you very much. Hope that helped, and see you for the next webinar.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Fabian, for presenting this class. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. You will get a video recording of the session. Just pay attention to your emails. And again, thank you, everyone, for being present with us here today.